Who actually died doing what they loved? My buddy's father. He died sitting in a lawn chair in the shade with a beer in his hand while watching kids play sandlot baseball across the street. He just fell asleep and didn't wake up. Didn't even spill his beer. Story 2 was a Greek philosopher who died of laughter after watching his donkey eat some fermented figs and get drunk. In some accounts, he was himself also extremely drunk. I feel like drunk Greek philosopher laughing at a drunk donkey is a great way to live and a great way to die. Story 3. She's unknown outside my family, but my great-grandmother. She was 82 when she died. She had been a widow for over 10 years by then, still living in her white house with its huge yard full of all the trees, shrubs, and flowers she tended so diligently. She dropped dead of a heart attack in her backyard one spring day, and it was the next-door neighbor who saw her there. Ita. This is, of course, my model for how to go out. Story 4. I remember being 7 years old when someone said this about an old sailor. We vaguely knew whose boat was found, floating out at sea, abandoned. He was never seen again and was declared dead at sea. I got in big trouble for pointing out that while he certainly did love sailing, he probably didn't love drowning, which is presumably how he died, so he didn't really die doing what he loved. There was a awkward pause after that. I often wonder why my parents bothered bringing me anywhere, to be honest. Story 5. William Anders, 90, a retired astronaut who took the Earthrise photo in the 1968, died in a solo plane crash in the San Juan Islands of Washington a couple weeks ago. Story 6. I had a friend in high school who died playing soccer, literally what he loved the most. He was playing goalie that day, took the ball to the chest, and I heard he collapsed. They were unable to bring him back. We were all 17 years old. Story 7. My great-grandmother was an alcoholic and was banned from buying alcohol in the little village where she lived. The nearest town was across the other side of the main highway. One day, she snuck across the lanes of traffic, went to the neighboring town, got herself 2 bottles of gin, and made it back across. She sat down, drunk one of them, passed out and died in her sleep, still clutching onto the other one with a smile on her face. They buried her with it. Story 8. An uncle of mine, when I was 17, died in the helicopter he was piloting. He was a bush pilot at the time. He'd done lots of small plane stuff and had moved onto helicopters at some point. When I was younger, I remember us all as a family going on plane rides with him more than once. But I don't remember getting a helicopter ride. Anyway, flying was his passion. He died pretty much instantly. Didn't suffer. He was delivering pipe or something to a work site on the side of a mountain. There was nowhere for him to set down properly, so he found somewhere to kind of balance on one strut while they got him unloaded or something. But there was a vertical pipe sticking up out of the ground nearby that he didn't notice, and witnesses report hearing this sudden ting-ting-ting-ting as his rotors made contact with the pipe. This threw everything off balance, and the engine or transmission, I don't really know, helicopter parts, tore free of its mounts and ripped through the back of the cockpit, taking off the back of his head. He was probably having a good day, doing some dangerous shit in the bush, and with a bit of an adrenaline rush from the situation at the time. Then before he knew what was happening, he was gone with his last memories being on top of his life goals. Story 9. My husband's grandfather was out to dinner with his close friends at a fancy restaurant, just to catch up after a long time. Had a lovely evening with them, polished off a big steak dinner and his favorite drink, promptly keeled over from a heart attack and died. His family jokes he did it before the check came so that his last meal would be free. Story 10. I've told this story before, but I used to work at a riding school, but we would do beach rides too. We live on the Scottish coast, so it's an hour ride through the woods. Then you're on the beach and you can ride all the way along it, around 5 miles long. Colleague of mine took out an experienced horse rider who had terminal cancer. The rider said that this was going to be her last ride before she went on hospice. So my colleague took her through all the pretty bits of the woods, and they got onto the beach just as the sun was beginning to set. They had a little trot down the beach, then decided to go on a gallop for the rest of the beach. By the time my colleague slowed her horse down after the gallop, the rider had had a heart attack and died, and was still on the horse by the time they'd stopped. My colleague told me that she was never too badly affected by someone dying on one of her beach hacks, because she knew the rider had died doing what she loved. Story 11. My dad. He loved road cycling in his Lycra. One day in 2006, he just never came home after his Sunday morning ride. He had a massive heart attack and died still attached to his bike in his favorite place in the world, Malakuta. I miss him every day. Story 12. My childhood buddy Chris and my mom's best friend Rita. Chris loved dirt bike racing more than anything on earth, traveled and competed all over the country. Never made it big, but that didn't matter. Went wide on a track in Alabama, trying to pass a couple of other racers. Hit a jump and went wide. Probably would have landed just outside the track, but caught a tree limb with his chin. Didn't break the limb, but yanked him off his bike and broke his neck. Doctors say he died instantly and probably didn't know what happened. Rita and my mom love backcountry trail horseback riding. Long, multi-day rides with a club big group of lady riders. Rita had apparently been quiet for a couple hours. Nothing unusual when riding through gorgeous county views. When they arrived at a watering stream for the horses, they discovered somewhere along the way Rita had had a heart attack and died in the saddle. Never fell off or anything, and her horse just stayed with the herd. Story 13. Antoni Gaudí stepped back off the curb to marvel at the early stages of Sagrada Familia. He was loved, his design cherished, promised that it would be of the people, built by tithes rather than a wealthy patron. Perhaps it would take longer, but be sweeter for it. I feel bad for the streetcar driver. Story 14. My cousin Sean. He struggled to find his way and finally got it all together. He worked for the Park Service and was essentially a professional hiker, camper. He was engaged to a lovely and gorgeous woman, and he died on a solo hike on a well-known trail not far from civilization. Sudden, unexpected, and difficult. He was young, life was high, he had all the things he was looking for, and honestly, what better way to go? At the top of your game, absolutely happy with where you're at. Story 15. Go to Disney Plus and watch the documentary called Fire of Love. Those two, Katya and Maurice Kraft, loved volcanoes. It's a very interesting film, and bonus, the whole aesthetic is like a real-life Wes Anderson movie. Story 16. Our online friend of my wife's was an avid participant in an online world she and he both enjoyed. One night, she logged in and found his vehicle crashed off to the side of the correct route. He'd had a heart attack at the computer and died playing. My wife called the rest of the usual team, and they all logged in and sat vigil by his character until a relative of his could log him out for the last time. Ever since, the surviving group members hold a memorial session in his name every June. Story 17. Michael Richards, a black artist whose practice largely fixated on airplanes as a motif of freedom and the Tuskegee Airmen. He had an art studio on one of the top floors at the WTC and was killed during. Story 18. My grandfather. He was a sportsman who loved cricket, boxing, and table tennis. In his retirement, he worked at a sports center when he could no longer play cricket. He helped raise money to build his local clubhouse, which stands today. He taught table tennis and was playing a charity match with the local police force. He won the doubles game, and his partner asked if he wanted to play a friendly game. He sat down and declined, saying, "You know what to do," and fell asleep, never waking up again. A girl who went to his lessons later went to represent Wales in the Commonwealth Games playing table tennis in Manchester a few years later. Story 19. My neighbor at my first house. Older guy. Very physically fit. USMC combat veteran of the Korean War. Wife had long since passed away. I found his body. All indications showed he was in the middle of getting in some of the old bayonet practice when he passed. I had always seen attractive 20-something women visiting him, but didn't think much of it. Turns out they were escorts. Wherever you are, Bob, keep on trucking you bad boy. Story 20. Walter E. Williams. He used to say, "If I should ever die, I want to have taught that day." He had class until 10 p.m., one of if not the last class of the semester. Died in his car later that night getting ready to drive home. Story 21. There is this Netflix documentary, The Deepest Breath, about people how practice free diving. Usually in open waters, one goes as deep as they can in a single breath. Multiple people lose their lives. I would say them. Horrible death, though. Story 22. Probably obscure reference, but one of the volcanologists studying Mount St. Helens, David Johnston. He was with the USGs and was working on ways to predict volcanic eruptions. IRC, he volunteered to gather data on St. Helens when it started showing seismic activity in late 1979 or early 1980. He was the first to report the 1980 eruption with the words, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," before he died. Can't speak for his thoughts and last moments, of course. But he had went out with a geologist colleague the evening before and told her to go home while he stayed at the observation where he died alone. Story 23. One of the most impressive men to ever grace the world's strongest man competition. Notable for screaming during a competition, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift," died of an aortic rupture while deadlifting in his gym. He was 32. I still use that line on heavy deadlift day at the gym. If that's my end, it will be an honorable one. RIP. Story 24. My cat, Mr. Cat, loved to pick fights with our other cats. He got out one day when people renting one of our units were moving in. We heard a huge cat fight in our neighborhood 3 days later, and we knew it was him. Sure enough, he came hobbling back in an hour. He passed 3 days later due to a traumatic diaphragm rupture. Rest in peace, you dense motherfucker. I love you so much. Story 25. Christina Grimmie, beautiful singer, murdered by a deranged dude while she was doing a meet and greet after a performance. Utterly tragic. She was such an incredible singer. Story 26. A family friend in her 80s. Still lived in her own house, still loved to bake, and still made her own preserves and jams. The day she died, she was making apricot jam from fruit grown in her own backyard. She even climbed a small ladder to pick them herself. She made the jam, got it jarred and sealed, cleaned up, then went for an afternoon nap and never woke up. Honestly, sounds like a pretty excellent way to go out. Story 27. A health teacher in my high school and his friend died from rock climbing. He loved rock climbing and would always talk about it whenever he got the chance. He went out with his friend to El Capitan in Yosemite National Park, and they both fell 1,000 feet to their death, all because another climber's backpack fell on them, making them lose their grip on the rock. This happened 6 years ago. Story 28. Might not quite fit, however, Grandpa loved baseball. So one fine Sunday, he and Grandma went to early church, came home, changed clothes, and he drove Grandma back to the church for a ladies' auxiliary day trip, stopped and got some donuts, and went home. That afternoon, he turned on the game and laid down on the couch in his study. He never woke up. Story 29. Paul-Henri Nargeolet, the French deep-sea explorer that died in the Titan submersible implosion last year. Given he was a deep-sea explorer for much of his life, in addition to being a well-known Titanic expert, NASA artifacts collector that visited the site on many famous expeditions since the 80s, it felt like a fitting demise. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the unwitting paying passengers. Story 30. A friend of my grandma's. He loved soccer. Since he was a kid, my grandma told me stories how he was really talented, and all he lived for was soccer. She really hasn't told me why he didn't go pro. He was playing alone soccer, practicing for his tomorrow tournament on a very hot day, and drank cold water. He died on the spot. Story 31. Franz Reichelt, an inventor who wanted to test a coat parachute. He went to the Eiffel Tower to test it in practice and demonstrate how safe it was. The local officials said he had to use a dummy instead of himself, so he said he would. He didn't, jumped and fell to his death. Still, it takes some gusto to make the leap. Story 32. IDK if this counts, but my great-uncle died putting his cowboy boots on at home on his ranch. On his way to meet his daughter for lunch and then to visit his wife, my great-aunt in the city at her care home. He didn't quite make it, but I'm sure he was super excited to see his loved ones. Story 33. My uncle and aunt both passed away together sitting on their chairs in the living room watching TV. They both lived in assisted living bungalows and caretakers were there straight away when they sensed something was wrong. Their 2 cups of tea were still warm on the coffee table when they were found. Story 34. Jane Little, a bass cellist for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, died at 87. She had been wire the orchestra 71 years. She died of a heart attack suffered while performing on stage. Nearly so anyway. What was the orchestra playing at the time she lost consciousness? There's no business like show business. Story 35. Tommy Cooper, Famous comedian not magician had a heart attack on live TV in front of an audience. The audience initially burst into laughter because they thought he was just being silly and it was part of his act. Story 36. Jim Fixx. He is credited with helping start America's fitness revolution by popularizing the sport of running and demonstrating the health benefits of regular jogging. He died of a heart attack while jogging at 52 years of age. Story 37. Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, aka Molière, was a French actor and poet. He would play the main roles in his comedies. He collapsed during the end of his own character's dying scene in his famous comedy ballet, The Imaginary Invalid,